in Calacas. I'm your host, Joe. So this week's episode, we're going to get into something a little bit spooky. We're starting off with Dia Los Muertos. Now, you're probably wondering, well, I already know about this, so what do you have to tell me? Okay, well, for those who are not familiar with the tradition and the festivity of Dia de los Muertos, El Dia de los Muertos is not your Mexican Halloween. I know a lot of people do think, oh, it's Mexican Halloween, you know, that you dress up, but it's not that. It's something more, I guess you could say, a little more refined, you know. It's not just about trick-or-treating and getting candy. It's about tradition. And tradition is very deeply rooted in the Mexican culture, which is kind of why, I'm very, passionate about this podcast, because I feel that the tradition of sitting, around with your abuelos and, talking to them and hearing, stories is something that isn't done anymore like it used to, years ago. Nowadays, people are stuck on their iPads and FaceTiming and Snapchatting and TikToking, that people don't take the time to sit around with their abuelitos and abuelitas and, get to know them. So, El Dia de los Muertos is something that, Mexicans, and not just Mexicans, I mean, this is a festivity that is celebrated around the world by many different, ethnicities, but, particularly those of Spanish descent. It is rooted within religion. It has a lot to do with honoring those that have passed before us. So people might think, oh no, that's so spooky, so, creepy and just macabre that, you're talking with the dead. And it's not about talking with the dead. It's about respecting and honoring the dead and letting them know that they are not forgotten. For anyone who has seen the movie Coco, you get an idea, a sense of what it is to honor your loved ones and those who have passed on before us. And it's a beautiful way of letting your ancestors know that they are still a part of you, that they're the reason you're here today. It's so beautiful. You usually have an altar and you decorate it with pictures of your loved ones, with papel picado, which is this beautiful paper that has like cut out images of one of the biggest icons for Dia de los Muertos is the monarch butterfly. And you have, it's cut out on their calaveritas, and, it's beautiful. You decorate the altar and you put out food from, that was loved by those who have passed on. So in some instances you have champurrado, some instances you have, tamalitos. And for those who were big in drinking, they have their favorite tequila or their whiskey. And you basically, you honor them in that sense, that saying, hey, I'm thinking of you. I'm going to share in your favorite meal. So that way you are a part of this table tonight. And El Dia de los Muertos, is celebrated on November the 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, go ahead and correct me in the comments. The 1st of November is El Dia de los Santos, or the De los Angelitos. It's where they celebrate the children who have passed on. And people think, oh no, it's on Halloween, and but the way it works, or the way it's rooted in this tradition, is that El Dia de los Muertos, around October 31st, the veil that separates the living and the dead thins out, so those who have passed on before us can actually cross through that veil and communicate with us. So you do have celebrations in cemeteries, and you're really thinking, oh my gosh, that is so creepy, like why? And I'm gonna be honest with you, the reason you do it is because that's where you're close to them. That's where their body was last was. And for those who may not have family members in cemeteries, which is fine. I mean, not everyone buries their loved ones. A lot of people do cremate them. You know, you sit them at the table with you, and you talk about memories with them, you know, things that they've done in the past that made you happy, you know, you cry with them, you just talk about them, and you just show them that you love them and you care. So, feliz Dia de los Muertos a toda mi familia y mis amigos allá. Just want you to know that, you know, we're celebrating, and I love you, and you're always in my heart and in my thoughts. So if you celebrate, you know, I'm glad that you do. If you don't celebrate, that's fine. If you want more information, message me. I do have a little bit more information, but I don't want to stick too long on the Dia de los Muertos. But I didn't want to, you know, bring it up and, you know, let anyone who follows this podcast know that I do celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and I do have a place, an altar for my father who did pass on 5 years ago. So let's carry on, and let's get into this week's subject, brujas. Okay, so when you think about brujas, you I mean, if you're not from the Mexican, Hispanic, you know, Spanish culture, you think of brujas and you're probably like, well, bruja, that's a witch. And yeah, it's a witch. And there's a difference between witch and bruja, and we're gonna get into that right now. So you have your American witch, and your American witch, you know, we all know that you had your Salem witch trials, and it was this big. And if you don't know, let me give you a little brief history on this. I do enjoy history. So the Salem witch trials took back in the 1600s, and so let's pause there. Let's rewind again, and let's think back to what is a witch. A witch is an individual, and I'm going to say individual because there was more than just women who were persecuted for being witches, you know. So the term witch is kind of broad, but, you know, mostly women were persecuted for, you could say, just being odd and abnormal, you know. And they would say, oh, these women, you know, they don't follow the Lord's rule, and they worship the devil, and, you know, they would go after these women and their families, and, you know, sometimes they didn't have families. Sometimes it was just, you know, them by themselves, and honestly, most of the time it was just them by themselves, and that's the reason they went after them, because, well, they had no one, you know, so they were like, well, how come, you know, Miss Betty, you know, Sue over here doesn't have a mate, and she's not married, and she's got no children, and but look, she's got 2 cats, and, you know, therefore she must be a witch. And it wasn't like that. I mean, we all know sometimes, you know, love just doesn't find you, and even if it does, sometimes it just doesn't work out, and that's perfectly fine, you know. So it wasn't fine then, and many women were, you know, they were tragically persecuted and tried for being witches, and, you know, being, if you were a witch, what they would kind of make you do, they would drown you, okay? And if you survived, oh man, that means, you know, you must have been a witch. And if you drowned and you died, well, that must have mean that you were telling the truth and you were not a witch, and you died because, well, you know, if you were a witch, you wouldn't have survived that, right? And it's like, oh man, well, she died, well, you know, too bad, so sad, well, one less person in this town, that's fine. And they would kind of just clear your name afterwards, saying, oh, okay, well, you know, Betty Good over here died, but hey, at least we know she wasn't a witch, right? The irony. So the Salem witch trials, you know, going back to that, you had a group of girls, and it started off with one girl who, I mean, she was found doing something odd, not normal of sorts, and because of that, you know, they asked her, well, what's going on? And she said, it's because I had a dream that the specter of, you know, so-and-so of Jane, you know, Marshall, she she came and attacked me at night in my dreams, and this is why I am acting the way I am. So what do? They go and find Jane Marshall, and they ask her, what's going on? Why are you attacking this woman? Are you a witch? And she's saying, no, I'm not a witch, you know. But she said your specter attacked her, and she would say, no, I'm not. So, and I mean, I'm assuming this is how it all went. It might have gone down completely different, right? But, you know, from what I have read in books, and I do read a lot of books, you know, there was a lot of having to, it was he said versus she said, and nothing really got, you know, cleared out easily. So by specter, these individuals often meant their spirit, you know, her spirit came, you know, to me. And if you know something about witches, they often say that witches can astral project themselves. So I won't get too much into the graphic of this because, you know, it's not that pretty. But they often say that, you know, witches, they get brooms, or they're associated with brooms because they would use the brooms to seal off their doors, you know, kind of block it, so that way people wouldn't come into their living space or wherever they were. So what they would do, they would lay down flat on their beds or the floor, wherever they were, and surrounded by candles and just whatnot, oils, I guess, suppose, maybe water. I'm not sure exactly what they would use. You know, I'm not too familiar with the practice itself, but they would lay down, and I guess using a sort of meditation, they would be able to astral project their spirit to another area or wherever they were. So these girls, you know, because they started off with one girl, and then it turned out to be a group of girls, I think maybe about 8 of them, started claiming that these women and these men, and like I said, it wasn't just women, sometimes it was men too, these women and men were, their specters, their spirits were leaving their bodies and attacking them and making them do crazy things. And I mean, they were pulling their hair, biting, and just all sorts of strange things. Now, my background's in psychology, and I've read, you know, about mania and how you can have one person experience one thing, and then, you know, by the power of suggestion, a group of other people can feel it too all of a sudden. And I'm going to, you know, I'm going to assume that might have been the case here. You know, one girl got caught doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing, and because of that one incident, you know, these other girls were like, oh my goodness, yes, you're right. You know, I did feel this today, yeah. You know, and it kind of spread like wildfire, and they started accusing, you know, just some of the townspeople, you know, and I mean, you didn't have no forensics teams back then, anything like that. So it was just the power of the word, and you know, they would bring in these people into court and try them, and you know, stone them and hang them, you know, for their beliefs or non-beliefs. And it was a big, you know, spectacle, kind of a big stain in the history of the United States. And you might say, well, Joe, there's a lot of big stains. Yeah, I mean, the United States is still a fairly young country, so I mean, honestly, I think we're still a bunch of teenagers, and as teenagers they make mistakes and they're learning from them, and you know, it's a lot of trial and error, and a lot of them it's a lot of errors, and you pick up from it. You know, those who, you know, do not learn about the past are doomed to repeat it. And you know, I'm hoping we don't repeat and start stoning women again. You know, don't stone your women. You know, just don't. It's not nice. No one wants to be stoned. No one wants to be, you know, drowned in a river either. And then, you know, if you survive, you're a witch. But if you don't, you know, you're basically, you know, dead, right? So anyways, that's the Salem witch trials. And brujas, that's something else. So brujas are witches as well, but a little bit more, I guess you could say, mystical. You know, it's not always about riding a broom through the air. It's sometimes just scarier than that. So I grew up with my grandparents talking to me about brujas. And it wasn't just brujas they would mention. They would mention the term lechusa. I'm hoping you're familiar with the term lechusa, but if you're not, let me tell you. So a lechusa is a bruja, is a witch. But it's a witch that can shapeshift. So usually this witch shapeshifts into a owl of sorts, you know, and it's and you think, Joe, there's owls everywhere, you know. You're right, but owls are not commonly found during the day, you know. Most of them are just nocturnal animals. A few are crepuscular, you get it, you know, sunset owls, you know, as you could say. Crepuscular. Yes, I was right. Sorry, couldn't get over it. Anyway, so lechusas are these witches, you know, who shapeshift, and because they shapeshift, you know, they are able to fly and attack their victims or take something from their victims. And you're thinking, okay, well, where are you going with this? Now, brujas and brujeria, two different things. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's not. You know, I'm not going to talk about brujeria right now. That's a subject for another day. Right now, I'm just going to focus on brujas. And the thing with brujas is that because they shapeshift, you know, they fly and they do things that you probably wouldn't normally do. So they say lechusas would, you know, if a bruja's after you or lechusa, you know, it stands around your property or it circles your property, and it, you know, you see it, and if you hear it, you know, it either sounds like a baby crying or like a cackle of sorts. And if you hear, you know, you say, well, okay, what? So just imagine you're at home and it's midnight. You're sitting on your sofa, nice and comfy, listening to this podcast, drinking a nice, you know, cup of café de olla, and you're thinking, that's funny. I hear a baby crying. And you just hear like a wah, wah, wah sound. And you're thinking, I don't have any kids. Where is this baby coming from? TV's off because, you know, clearly you're listening to this podcast. And you look out the window because you hear the sound is coming from the outside. And you look out the window, and what do you see? Maybe standing on your fence, on your tree, maybe even on top of your car, is this big owl. And you think, okay, that's a little strange, you know. And then you realize the sound of the baby crying is coming from that owl. And you're like, extra strange. So if you've seen scary movies, they usually tell you don't go outside, don't investigate. If you go investigate, something's going to happen to you. And again, heed my warning, don't go investigate the sound of the baby crying. Because that's kind of the bruja's way of luring you outside and taking you and attacking you. So they said these brujas turn into these big owls because that was their way of attacking their victims, or as well taking a piece of garment from their victims, something that they would need from that victim, from that person, to be able to do brujeria on them. And again, I won't talk about brujeria right now, just the bruja. So, you know, imagine that happens, right? And you think, well, okay, that's creepy. It is creepy because anyone can be a bruja. Anyone can be a witch. Now, not all witches are, you know, are evil and owls. I mean, but this is a cuento that my grandparents would tell me. So back when I was young, maybe about 4 years old, and my great grandfather still lived, and I remember an incident once. You know, I mean, I remember it through talk with my family. You know, I don't remember the incident exactly happening entirely. But I remember that we used to have this big, beautiful tree in our backyard. And for the longest time, this big white owl would every single night go and perch itself in that tree. And it would do this kind of strange hooting sound. Not necessarily like a cry, and not really a cackle, but it was a weird hooting sound. I don't remember the hooting exactly, but it would have a particular call. So my great grandfather said, "Oh, esa es una bruja," that's a witch. And he was a firm believer in that. And that man, said, when you see and encounter a bruja, you need to yell at it, you need to curse at it, and you tell it, "Ven mañana por sal," come tomorrow for salt. And that whoever that bruja was, because you gave them a command, they would have to show up at the next day at your house asking for a cup of salt. So, I mean, I know that we never actually yelled at the owl to do that, but how strange is it that this big white snowy owl just lands in your backyard, like on a daily, on an evening, basis, and it's just there, It wasn't sleeping there during the day though, because I do recall my dad going out there and, checking the tree, and there was no nest. It would just land there every single night, around midnight. And I mean, I don't know what time it would leave. I mean, I would fall asleep eventually, but yeah, I remember, it would land there in the middle of the night and just hoot. So during that time, one time my grandfather was sitting out, my great grandfather, but I call him Grandpa Chapa. So Grandpa Chapa was sitting outside with my grandma, with my actual grandmother, and one of our neighbors who happened to be an aunt. Yeah, my neighborhood was like close-knit family. So it was my aunt, my grandma, and my Grandpa Chapa, and we're sitting outside in the porch, or they were sitting, I wasn't there. They were sitting outside in the porch, and Grandpa Chapa, saw this big brown owl. And I mean, everyone saw it, not just him, but it just happened that he happened to see it first. And that owl might have had some vengeance towards him, because just listen. So the owl flew around the house. It encircled it 3 times going clockwise, okay? And on the 3rd round, it swooped in through the side of the porch, okay? And my Grandpa Chapa was sitting in a wheelchair, and this owl came, swooped, and encircled the top of his head, then encircled the top of my grandmother's head, and then flew off and went behind a house, and they didn't see it anymore. My tia, apparently she was like, "Oh, I ain't sticking around for this," and she left. Yeah, so she took off, and she just went off on foot, and she's like, "I'm going back home." So she did. She took off home, and like I said, the neighborhood's like close knit family, so she didn't live that far away, just a couple of houses down. And Grandpa Chapa and my grandmother, were like, they were arguing. My Grandpa Chapa was telling my grandma, "Esa es una bruja. La señora de esa casa es una bruja." And my grandma was like, "No digas eso. No digas eso, papá." And I mean, I believe my Grandpa Chapa. Grandpa Chapa said the lady was a witch. Hey, she must have been a witch. I mean, who am I to argue with my elders, right? Anyway, so Grandpa Chapa really had this firm belief that lady was a witch, and it was just so strange that the owl flew 3 times around the house, then swooped in, went around his head, then went around my grandmother's head, took off, didn't touch my tia's head at all, but she was a believer too in Lechusas. I mean, honestly, it's this area here, the area in the frontera, firm believers in these leyendas and these creencias, and why not, right? So this happened, and it was very strange to Grandpa Chapa, and he believed that that's a bruja, and thinking about it now, I mean, okay, sure, science-wise, maybe it was just an owl, you know, flying around at 3 in the afternoon, because why not, right? But it first went in, and I mean, you could say it attacked Grandpa Chapa. You know, it gave him a scratch on top of his head, and it flew off. So why would this owl do that? I mean, it's so strange. And if you are someone who is into avians and knows things about birds, let me know what you think. I'm curious. You know, this happened when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and it's been years, been several years, and I still don't know why something like that would happen. You know, I've researched owls, and you know, and to me it just makes no sense. You know, maybe it's just electromagnetic, you know, something or another, and the owl just had its wires crossed, right? But to Grandpa Chapa, that was a bruja. And I remember him, you know, talking to me, telling me, you know, a bruja has to be, you know, to be safe and not let anyone, you know, just go and attack me. And if I feel like I was being attacked by a bruja, to curse at it, you know, say those curse words at it, you know, English, Spanish, but whatever you say, make sure you yell at it, ven mañana por sal. And I don't believe Grandpa Chapa yelled at the bruja to come back for salt. You know, if he did, it didn't happen, which didn't come back. You know, but, you know, just putting it out there in case you run into a lechusa or a bruja, you know, at night, tell it to come back for salt the next day, and let's see if it happens. I mean, I'm curious. Now, you know, I don't know what kind of witch you would call that. I mean, a creepy kind of witch, maybe? I know there's different types of witches now. I did do a little research on that, and nothing that I read about these witches fit that description, you know, other than witches who play with dark magic, you know. And if that's you, hey, by all means, go for it. Not something that I myself do, but, you know, hey, if that's you, that's cool. You know, I support you in what you do. Just remember, love and peace and respect others, please. But yeah, that happened to Grandpa Chapa and my grandma. And I just remember thinking, oh man, how creepy, you know, like, things like this happen. So in this area, yeah, it's known. Brujas do exist. And they sometimes turn into owls. And you're thinking, yeah, that's pretty creepy. And it is. I mean, I would hate to be in bed and then hear a cackle of sorts coming from the outside of my window, and then just look and just see an owl out there. I mean, I would really hate that. I mean, who wouldn't, right? So good. Coffee tonight. It's Café de Olla. If you've never had Café de Olla, you're missing out. It's so good. Drinking from my new RGB mug. I love it. It has all these little depictions of the Rio Grande Valley. And honestly, my favorite part of the mug is the elote. If you know me, I love elote, so that touched my heart. But honestly, you know, brujas can be, when you're 4 and 5 and your grandpa's telling you that witches can turn into owls, it's scary. Let me know what you think about lechusas, what you've heard, and what you think about brujas. I mean, I'm curious. And if you know brujas, and if you are one, let me know what kind of magic you practice. I'm curious about that too. You know, thank you for listening. And if you want more stories about brujas and lechusas, let me know in the comments. Trust me, I have a lot more to talk about. Just wanted to keep it short, you know, so I wouldn't take up too much of your time. But let me know what you're interested in, and I'm happy to discuss that in the next podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Like and subscribe. It helps keep this channel going. And drink some coffee, because life begins after coffee. Thanks.